It seemed like an ordinary night in Robert's restaurant, but what he experienced left him shocked and humiliated. A shocking act by his own staff turned everything upside down, but how Robert responds next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned until the end to see how this story unfolds. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Robert Harris, the owner of a highly regarded restaurant, decided to spend the evening in his own establishment, not as the successful businessman everyone knew him as, but as an ordinary customer. He wanted to experience the restaurant as a guest, to feel the atmosphere without the influence his presence as an owner typically brought. Wearing a simple shirt and jeans, Robert slipped through the front door, unnoticed by the staff who were too busy attending to customers and setting tables to pay attention to his arrival. Taking a seat at a corner table near the entrance, he waited patiently, hoping to observe without drawing any attention. The ambiance of the restaurant was warm and welcoming, or so it appeared on the surface. Soft lighting bathed the tables, which were neatly draped in fine linens, while gentle music played in the background, adding a relaxed, elegant touch to the setting. Conversations murmured in soft tones, interrupted only by the clinking of glasses and silverware. Patrons filled the room. Some gathered in groups, laughing and enjoying their evening, while others sat alone, lost in the experience of the restaurant's ambiance. It was a place meant for people to unwind, to forget their worries, and to indulge in the culinary excellence that had earned the restaurant its esteemed reputation in the city. As Robert surveyed the room, he noticed a few familiar faces, regular customers who visited often to enjoy the consistent service and high-quality dishes. He also observed newcomers, people drawn by the restaurant's reputation, some looking around, eager to sample the cuisine and atmosphere they'd heard so much about. The entire setting should have been ideal, but Robert had come with a specific purpose, and as he looked more closely, he noticed subtle, troubling signs that something was amiss. A young waitress, her name tag reading Lisa, approached Robert's table after a few minutes. She was neat, professional-looking, and maintained a calm expression. However, as she greeted him, her demeanor lacked warmth, and her smile seemed forced, almost as if it were more a matter of habit than genuine friendliness. "Yes?" she asked abruptly, her voice carrying an unmistakable air of impatience. Taken aback, Robert replied politely, "Good evening. I'd like to order a meal, please." Lisa's gaze scanned over him, her expression cool and detached, almost calculating. Her eyes drifted to his casual attire, and he could sense a subtle shift in her attitude, a faint hint of judgment, as though he didn't quite belong in this refined setting. There was no welcome in her smile, no warmth in her tone. She appeared slightly annoyed, as if his presence were a mere inconvenience interrupting her routine. As Robert placed his order, he noticed Lisa's stance remained tense, her posture formal but lacking any indication of enthusiasm or attentiveness. She scribbled down his order quickly, giving a barely concealed sigh as she did so, and walked away without a word. Robert watched her as she moved through the dining area, noting the way she interacted with other patrons. With those who appeared well-dressed and affluent, her approach softened, her demeanor transformed into something more approachable. She laughed with some, spoke politely with others, and maintained a cheerful presence. But when she glanced back at Robert, her expression hardened again, and he felt her judging gaze once more, a silent suggestion that he was unwelcome in his own establishment. Observing the dining room more carefully, Robert began to notice similar patterns in the behavior of other staff members. Servers and hosts tended to treat certain guests, those who looked the part of the restaurant's ideal clientele, with warmth and attentiveness, while others, dressed more simply, were met with a cooler, more detached attitude. He could see guests who were treated warmly, with smiles and small talk, while others were barely acknowledged. As he waited for his meal, Robert felt the weight of these observations settling heavily on him. He had always envisioned his restaurant as a place where anyone could come, regardless of appearance or status, and be treated with equal respect and kindness. It was painful to see the subtle, almost invisible division that had crept into the environment. The energy in the room shifted whenever he looked up, catching glimpses of servers exchanging glances, their expressions marked by a sense of mild disdain or indifference toward patrons who didn't meet their standards. When Lisa returned with his drink, she set it down on the table with a nod, still without any effort to engage him in conversation or make him feel welcome. Instead, she turned sharply on her heel and walked away, barely sparing him another glance. Her actions spoke volumes, and Robert felt a surge of disappointment at the lack of hospitality she displayed. Sipping his drink in silence, Robert scanned the room once more, noting small details he might have overlooked on previous visits. The interactions he witnessed left him uneasy. The smiles he had thought genuine felt forced, the conversations scripted. While some tables were graced with cheerful interactions, his was left in isolation, as if he were an inconvenience, an outlier. After what seemed like an eternity, Lisa returned with his meal. She placed the plate before him with a curt nod, her expression revealing a faint distaste, as though serving him were beneath her. Robert glanced down at the dish, his appetite dampened by the atmosphere surrounding him. The food was presented haphazardly, lacking the care and detail he knew his chefs were capable of. It looked as though it had been prepared with minimal effort, as if someone assumed that he wouldn't care or notice. "Is there anything else?" Lisa asked flatly, her tone devoid of any warmth or concern. Robert managed a polite smile and shook his head, feeling his irritation grow but choosing to suppress it for the time being. He reminded himself that he was here to observe, to understand what was happening within his establishment. There would be time for action later, but for now, he needed to see how deep this attitude ran among his staff. He took a few bites of his meal, the flavors bland and uninspired, a far cry from the exceptional cuisine his chefs were known for. Robert continued to watch as Lisa and her colleagues exchanged knowing glances, their subtle smirks and whispered conversations only adding to the bitterness he felt. It was as though he were being purposefully alienated, excluded from the environment he had carefully crafted. As the evening wore on, Robert's discontent solidified into a quiet determination. He could no longer ignore what he had witnessed. This wasn't a simple matter of one rude waitress or a poorly prepared dish. There was a deeper problem here, a shift in the culture of his restaurant that required immediate attention. He had spent years building this place from the ground up, pouring his heart and resources into creating an establishment where anyone could feel welcome. To see it reduced to a place that judged its patrons based on appearances, even subtly, was a betrayal of everything he had envisioned. Finally, as he finished his meal, Robert placed his napkin on the table and stood up, leaving a generous tip despite the poor service. He glanced around the room one last time, taking in the faces of the staff and patrons, each immersed in their own worlds, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing within him. As he walked toward the door, his resolve grew stronger with each step. He knew he would return, but next time he would not come as an anonymous guest. Robert stepped out into the cool night air, his mind already racing with plans. He had seen enough to understand that change was needed, and he was prepared to confront whatever lay ahead. This was his establishment, his creation, and he would not let it be tarnished by the prejudices and arrogance of a few individuals. Tomorrow he would return, not as a mere observer, but as the rightful owner, ready to reclaim his restaurant and restore the values that had made it what it was meant to be. The following evening, Robert Harris returned to his restaurant, once again dressed in the same unassuming attire. Despite the subtle but unmistakable disdain he had faced from the staff the previous night, he was determined to continue his observation. He needed to see how deep the issue ran, to understand if the cold treatment he had received was an isolated incident or an entrenched behavior among his employees. Slipping into a seat near the back, he waited, fully aware of what might happen next. The restaurant buzzed with life, filled with the hum of quiet conversations and the occasional laughter of patrons enjoying their evening. For the customers dressed in business casual or more refined attire, the staff moved with a practiced ease, smiling and chatting, attentive to every need. But the moment Robert took his seat, he felt the same unease from the previous night settle over him like an unwelcome weight. Almost immediately, he sensed that he was once again an outsider in his own establishment. After a short wait, Lisa, the same waitress from the night before, spotted him and made her way over to his table. A barely concealed frown tugged at the corners of her mouth, and her eyes narrowed as she recognized him. She hesitated for a moment, lingering by another table, sharing a joke with patrons who were dressed more appropriately, according to her unspoken standards. Finally, after making Robert wait an uncomfortable amount of time, she approached him, her expression as icy as it had been the previous night. "You're back," she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise and unmistakable irritation. It was as though she couldn't believe he had returned, or perhaps she thought he hadn't gotten the message from his previous visit. "Yes, I am," Robert replied calmly, forcing himself to mask his frustration. He kept his tone polite, reminding himself that he was here to observe, to understand the full extent of the issue. "I enjoyed the atmosphere last night and thought I'd come again." Lisa's lips curled into a tight smile, but it held no warmth. She gave a half-hearted nod and replied, "Well, I suppose we can accommodate you." She pulled out her notepad with a sigh, tapping her pen against it impatiently. Robert suppressed a sigh of his own, carefully maintaining his composure. "I'll have the chef's special tonight, please," he said, offering her a polite smile, hoping that this simple order might make the process go more smoothly. Lisa jotted down the order, her expression flat and uninterested. She muttered something under her breath, though Robert couldn't quite make out her words, and walked away without another glance, leaving him, once again, to wait in silence. As he sat alone, Robert observed the way the staff moved around the dining area, their behavior noticeably different toward other customers. Lisa, in particular, seemed animated, smiling and laughing as she chatted with patrons who appeared to fit her image of the restaurant's ideal clientele. The ease with which she shifted between politeness and coldness was striking, and Robert couldn't ignore the pattern. He had built this restaurant to be a place of equal respect, a place where anyone, regardless of background or appearance, could come and feel at home. Watching his staff treat him with such detachment, as though he were an inconvenience, was both painful and infuriating. After a few minutes, Lisa returned with his drink. She set the glass down on the table with a force that made the liquid ripple, as though she wanted to remind him of his place without needing to say a word. "Anything else?" she asked, barely looking at him, her tone as cold as before. Robert shook his head, hiding his growing irritation. He could feel the eyes of the staff on him, the way they whispered to each other, stealing glances in his direction as though he were some kind of anomaly. It was as if he were a source of amusement, a subject of quiet ridicule among the employees. The tension in the air felt thick and heavy, and Robert had to remind himself again why he was there. He needed to see this through, to witness firsthand the environment that had taken root in his restaurant. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lisa returned with his meal. She set the plate down in front of him with a smirk, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and something darker. Robert looked down at the dish, feeling his stomach churn at the sight before him. On the plate, arranged with mockery rather than care, was a dead rat. Its lifeless body was positioned as though it were some kind of twisted gourmet dish, the stench of decay overpowering the usual sense of the restaurant's fine cuisine. The sight and smell were revolting, and Robert felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Around him, laughter broke out, quiet chuckles from the staff, amused smirks from nearby patrons who had noticed his meal. The few employees gathered by the kitchen door snickered openly, some nudging each other and sharing grins as they watched his reaction. Even Lisa allowed herself a cruel smile, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Oh, is something wrong?" she asked, feigning innocence, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought you'd enjoy our special. It's unique, don't you think?" Robert's hands clenched at his sides, and he could feel the anger rising within him, bubbling just beneath the surface. But he forced himself to remain calm, to control his emotions. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him react, of watching him break. He pushed the plate aside, his expression hardening as he met Lisa's gaze. "I'd like the check, please," he said evenly, his voice steady despite the humiliation boiling inside him. Lisa's smirk widened, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She nodded, turned on her heel, and returned a moment later with the bill, tossing it onto the table with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Her expression was one of barely concealed amusement, as though she were enjoying every second of his discomfort. Robert took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his wallet. He placed a generous tip on the table, keeping his gaze fixed on Lisa's face. For a brief moment, he saw her smirk falter, a flicker of surprise crossing her features as she noticed the amount. Her mouth opened slightly, as though she wanted to say something, but Robert simply nodded politely, rising from his seat and walking out of the restaurant without another word. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the humiliation he had endured gave way to a steely resolve. This was no longer a matter of simple rudeness or poor service. What he had witnessed was a systemic issue, a deep-seated problem within his restaurant's culture that could not be ignored. The experience had been dehumanizing, a cruel reminder that prejudice and arrogance had no place in the values he had built his business on. The restaurant was meant to be a space of respect and inclusion, and he would not let it be tarnished by a few individuals who believed they could treat others with disdain. Robert knew he would return, but next time he wouldn't come as a humble, anonymous guest. He would return as the owner, ready to confront his staff and take back control of his restaurant. There would be no tolerance for the behavior he had endured, no room for the toxic attitudes that had seeped into his establishment. Tomorrow, he would walk back into that building not as an outsider, but as the rightful authority, and those who had mocked him would face the consequences of their actions. The cool night air filled his lungs, steadying him as he formulated his plan. This wasn't just about correcting an employee's behavior or adjusting a single staff member's attitude. It was about reclaiming the heart of his restaurant, about reminding everyone, from the lowest-ranked server to the most seasoned chef, that respect was not optional. With his resolve firm, Robert walked away from the restaurant, knowing that tomorrow would bring a reckoning. The employees who thought they could look down on guests who mocked and humiliated anyone who didn't fit their mold would soon learn that they had crossed a line, and he, Robert Harris, would ensure that the values he held dear were restored, that his establishment would once again be a place where every person felt valued, where no one would ever be humiliated as he had been tonight. The next day, Robert Harris arrived at his restaurant with a quiet but unshakable resolve. This time there would be no simple clothing or anonymous presence. Today, he was stepping through those doors as the rightful owner, accompanied by a few security personnel and even a police officer, prepared to confront those who had disrespected not only him, but the values his restaurant was built on. He was done observing. Today, he would act. As he entered, a ripple of tension spread through the restaurant. The staff, who had seen him only as an unassuming, ordinary man the past 2 nights, now looked at him with widening eyes, a flicker of unease crossing their faces. Whispers circulated quickly among the employees, and all eyes were fixed on him as he walked confidently to the center of the dining area, positioning himself where every staff member could see and hear him. Lisa, the waitress who had served him with contempt, was among the first to spot him. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost, her smirk from the previous night vanishing instantly as the reality of the situation set in. Beside her, a few other employees exchanged nervous glances, clearly apprehensive about what was about to unfold. Robert held his gaze steady, scanning the faces of the staff and noting their reactions: surprise, fear, uncertainty. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, then spoke with a voice that was calm but laced with authority. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he began, his tone cutting through the silence. "My name is Robert Harris, and I'm the owner of this restaurant." A stunned silence followed his words. The employees who had laughed, mocked, and disregarded him just the night before now looked on with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Lisa's face went pale, her mouth opening slightly as she tried to process what he had just said. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from under her, and her confidence crumbled in an instant. Robert's gaze landed on Lisa, and he let his words settle, taking his time as he continued. "I came here the past 2 nights to see how my staff treats customers. I wanted to experience the service we offer firsthand, as any other guest would, and I'm appalled by what I witnessed." Lisa stammered, trying to find words, her voice shaky. "Mr. Harris, I didn't know. If I'd known who you were—" Robert silenced her with a raised hand, his expression unyielding. Respect is not something that should depend on knowing someone's identity. It is a fundamental part of this establishment, or at least it should be. Yet, over the past 2 nights, I was subjected to contempt, ridicule, and outright disrespect, behavior I would never tolerate from my staff toward any guest, no matter who they are. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Every member of the staff stood frozen, some looking at the floor, others glancing at each other, aware that this confrontation was the result of their own actions, either through participation or silent compliance. Turning back to Lisa, Robert's voice grew colder. "And you," he said, his tone firm and direct, displayed a shocking level of unprofessionalism and outright disdain. "The way you treated me and encouraged others to join in was unacceptable." Lisa's face reddened, her composure slipping away as she struggled to speak. "Mr. Harris, please. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I apologize." Robert's expression remained hard, unmoved by her words. "An apology now won't change what happened, Lisa. I gave you every opportunity to provide simple, respectful service. But instead, you chose mockery and cruelty. I cannot and will not allow someone who behaves that way to continue working in this establishment." The tension in the room was palpable as Robert gave a slight nod to the security personnel who stepped forward, ready to escort Lisa out of the restaurant. She looked around, desperate for someone to support her, but no one moved, no one spoke. The realization sank in, and Lisa's shoulders slumped as she accepted her fate. Without another word, she was led toward the door, her head hanging in shame. As she was escorted out, Robert turned his attention to the remaining staff, his gaze sweeping over the room. Their faces were filled with apprehension, guilt, and in some cases, shame. He let a few moments pass, allowing the weight of Lisa's departure to settle in, before he addressed them all. "To the rest of you," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "I'm here to make it very clear that the behavior I witnessed these past 2 nights will no longer be tolerated. I built this restaurant with the vision of creating a place of respect, inclusivity, and excellence. Somewhere along the way, those values have been compromised, and that ends today." Some employees shifted uncomfortably, others nodded quietly, aware that the consequences of their actions were no longer hypothetical. Robert continued, his tone unwavering. "I am implementing immediate changes. Effective today, this restaurant will undergo a complete restructuring of its policies and standards. There will be new mandatory training sessions on customer service, respect, and inclusivity. This establishment will return to the values I set when I first opened it, and if any of you cannot or will not align with that vision, you're free to leave." He paused, letting his words sink in. He could see that the employees understood the gravity of the situation, that the old ways of doing things were over. There was a new standard now, and he was determined to uphold it. One of the chefs, a man named Carl, stepped forward hesitantly, his face filled with uncertainty. "Mr. Harris, I just want to say, if we had known who you were, none of this would have happened," he said, his voice tentative. Robert's gaze sharpened as he looked directly at Carl. "And that's exactly the problem, Carl. You shouldn't need to know someone's status or identity to treat them with basic respect. The fact that you think my position would change how I'm treated says more about the problem than anything else." Carl's face reddened as he lowered his gaze, stepping back into the silent crowd. The other staff members looked on, a mixture of shame and fear reflected in their expressions as they realized the implications of Robert's words. Robert let out a breath, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before addressing the group once more. "Anyone who took part in last night's events, anyone who stood by and did nothing while another human being was humiliated, will be held accountable. If you are still here after today, you will be expected to uphold the values of this restaurant and treat every guest with respect. If that doesn't align with your beliefs, you're welcome to leave now." He waited, watching as the silence stretched, his words hanging heavily in the air. One by one, a few employees began to step forward, shame etched on their faces. They gathered their belongings, nodding in acknowledgement to him before leaving the room. Robert respected their decision. It was better for them to leave now than to stay and pretend they could embrace the new values he intended to enforce. When the last of those who had chosen to leave exited the restaurant, Robert turned his attention back to the remaining staff. Their faces were a blend of fear, determination, and relief, a collective sense of awareness that things would be different moving forward. To those of you who have decided to stay," he continued, his tone softening slightly, "understand this. We are starting fresh. There will be new standards, and everyone will undergo training to ensure that this restaurant becomes the place of respect and hospitality I know it can be. This is your chance to be a part of something better. Make no mistake, this is a second chance, and it is the only one you will receive." The employees nodded, their expressions resolute. Robert could see that they were genuinely committed to making a change, to upholding the principles he had established. Many of them looked genuinely remorseful, recognizing the role they had played in allowing a toxic environment to take root. But he also saw a spark of determination, a willingness to make amends and embrace a new way of operating. One of the newer waitresses, a young woman named Emily, stepped forward, her face filled with sincerity. "Thank you, Mr. Harris," she said softly. "We understand, and we're committed to making this right. We know we could have done better, and we will." Robert nodded, feeling a slight sense of relief. "Thank you, Emily," he replied. "I'm counting on all of you to help rebuild this place, to make it a restaurant we can all be proud of. Together, we will create a space where everyone feels welcome." With that, he introduced a few associates who would help implement the upcoming changes, including new policies, mandatory sensitivity training, and new guidelines for customer service, all designed to create a culture of respect and inclusivity. The staff listened attentively, nodding along as he outlined the plans for a better future. As he looked around the room at the remaining employees, Robert felt a sense of accomplishment settle over him. This was just the beginning, a first step toward reclaiming his restaurant and restoring the values that had once defined it. He knew there was still work to be done, that rebuilding the restaurant's reputation would take time and effort, but he was ready to face the challenge head-on. The employees dispersed to begin their shifts or attend training sessions, each one carrying a renewed sense of purpose. Robert felt his resolve strengthen as he watched them prepare to embrace the new standards, to transform the restaurant into a place where every guest was treated with dignity and respect. As he prepared to leave, Robert took a final look around the restaurant, knowing that from this moment on, things would never be the same. This was the beginning of a new era for his establishment, a place where everyone, regardless of who they were, would be welcomed as equals. In the days that followed the confrontation, Robert Harris set his plan for the restaurant's transformation into motion. He knew that it would take more than a single declaration to erase the toxicity that had crept into his establishment. True change would require commitment, patience, and vigilance. So, early the next morning, he returned to the restaurant to oversee the implementation of the new standards and practices, knowing this was a crucial step in rebuilding both the restaurant's culture and its reputation. The remaining staff assembled in the dining area, their faces a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Robert could see the lingering shame in some of their expressions, but he also saw resolve. These were the employees who had chosen to stay, who had silently committed themselves to the values he intended to reestablish. They waited for him to speak, eager for direction, aware that today marked the beginning of a new chapter. "Good morning, everyone," Robert began, his voice carrying both authority and encouragement. "Thank you for being here and for choosing to stay. Today, we're going to make some important changes. This is an opportunity for all of us to create a restaurant we can be proud of, a place where everyone is welcomed and respected. And I know we can achieve that if we work together." With those words, Robert introduced his associates, an experienced team who would be helping him roll out the necessary reforms. They began by outlining the new policies that would guide the restaurant moving forward. The first of these was mandatory sensitivity and inclusivity training for all employees, aimed at ensuring that every staff member understood the importance of treating each guest, regardless of background or appearance, with equal respect and warmth. The staff listened intently as the trainers explained that these sessions would cover topics like empathy, nonverbal communication, and unconscious bias. It was clear from the reactions of many employees that this was new territory for them. Robert could see that some were intimidated by the prospect, while others were quietly hopeful, perhaps relieved to be given a chance to learn and grow. As the trainers moved on to the next policy, a zero-tolerance approach toward discrimination and prejudice, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The employees understood that these were no mere guidelines. They were the foundation on which Robert intended to rebuild the restaurant. Anyone found disregarding these standards would face immediate consequences, with no exceptions. Following the initial announcements, the staff were divided into small groups to begin their first training session. Robert stayed nearby, observing from a distance as the trainers led discussions and activities designed to foster empathy and self-awareness. He watched as the employees engaged in role-playing exercises, putting themselves in the shoes of customers who might feel alienated or unwelcome. He could see moments of understanding dawning on their faces, and for the first time since he had begun this journey, he felt a genuine sense of hope. Later that afternoon, Robert gathered the staff together once more. As he looked around at them, he felt a deep respect for those who had chosen to stay and embrace the changes he was bringing. They had shown resilience and humility, willing to confront the flaws that had taken root in their workplace and committed to making amends. "We're starting fresh," he said, his tone warm but firm. "This isn't just about policies or training. It's about creating a culture of respect and kindness. Every guest who walks through our doors deserves to feel valued, and it's up to each one of you to make that happen." One of the younger waitresses, Emily, who had spoken up during the initial meeting, raised her hand. "Mr. Harris," she began hesitantly, "thank you for giving us this chance. I think we all understand now that we can do better, and we're ready to prove it." Her words were met with nods from her fellow employees, their expressions sincere. Robert gave her a small smile, nodding in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Emily," he replied, "and thank you to everyone here. I know that this isn't easy, but I believe in you, and I believe in the future we're creating together." As the training sessions continued over the following weeks, Robert noticed a visible shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. The staff moved with a new sense of purpose, their interactions with one another becoming warmer and more respectful. The cold, judgmental glances he had witnessed before were now replaced by supportive smiles, and employees took the time to assist one another, fostering a sense of camaraderie and unity. Robert also introduced a mentorship program to strengthen the restaurant's culture. In this program, senior staff members were paired with newer employees, guiding them through the restaurant's standards and instilling the values that Robert wanted at the core of the establishment. Emily quickly rose to the occasion, becoming an unofficial leader among her peers. Her genuine warmth and dedication to the restaurant's new values set an example, and she took pride in helping others understand the importance of respect and inclusivity. One day, as the staff prepared for a busy dinner service, Robert gathered everyone together for a brief meeting. It was a tradition he had reinstated, an opportunity for the team to align their goals and support each other before the restaurant opened its doors. As he looked around at the attentive faces of his employees, Robert felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. "I want to thank each and every one of you," he began, his voice filled with sincerity. "This restaurant is becoming what I always dreamed it could be, and that's because of your hard work and dedication. Together, we've created something special, a place where every guest feels welcome and every staff member is valued." The team broke into applause, their faces lighting up with genuine smiles. They understood the importance of what they had achieved, the significance of the environment they had helped create. Robert could see the pride in their expressions, a pride rooted not only in the quality of the service they provided, but in the values they upheld. As the restaurant opened that evening, Robert stayed to observe the shift. He watched as his staff welcomed guests with warmth and attentiveness, moving through the dining area with ease and confidence. Each interaction was marked by a genuine desire to make the guest feel at home, and Robert knew that this change was more than superficial. His restaurant had become a place where respect and kindness were truly woven into every experience. In recognition of the journey they had taken, Robert installed a small plaque near the entrance. The inscription read, "In this place, all are welcome, all are respected, and all are valued. May every guest who walks through these doors feel the warmth of kindness and the strength of community." The plaque became a symbol of the restaurant's commitment to inclusivity, a reminder to staff and guests alike of the values that defined the establishment. Word of the restaurant's transformation spread throughout the community. Patrons who had once felt uncomfortable now returned, delighted to see the changes and impressed by the renewed sense of hospitality that filled the space. Regulars began sharing stories of the restaurant's turnaround, and new faces arrived, drawn by the establishment's reputation for respect and quality. The restaurant had become a beacon of inclusivity in the city, a place where people from all walks of life could gather and feel valued. Robert found himself greeted with pride each time he entered, watching as his staff embraced every guest with warmth and genuine attention. The team worked seamlessly, supporting one another and treating each interaction with care. Emily continued to shine as a mentor, guiding new hires with patience and reinforcing the importance of the values that had been restored. Months passed, and the restaurant thrived, not only as a place of culinary excellence, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together with a shared commitment to respect and kindness. Robert knew that maintaining this environment would require continuous effort, that there would always be challenges ahead, but he was more than ready to face them with the right team by his side. One afternoon, as the restaurant prepared for the evening service, Robert gathered the team for one final meeting, a moment to celebrate how far they had come. The staff stood around him, their faces attentive and filled with respect. As he looked around the room, Robert felt a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. "I couldn't be prouder of what we've built here," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This restaurant has become a place where everyone feels welcome, where respect and kindness are at the heart of everything we do, and I couldn't have done it without each one of you." Emily stepped forward, smiling. "Thank you, Mr. Harris," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You gave us all a chance to be better, to make this a place we can be proud of, and I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're committed to keeping it that way." The room erupted in applause, the team united in their commitment to the future they had created together. As they prepared to welcome the evening's guests, Robert felt a sense of peace settle over him. This restaurant had become everything he had dreamed of, a place where everyone, regardless of who they were, could feel at home. And as the night unfolded, filled with the laughter and joy of satisfied customers, Robert stood back, watching the team he had built work together with pride and purpose. This was his legacy, his vision brought to life, and he knew that with the right people by his side, this was only the beginning of the impact they would have. The plaque near the entrance served as a silent reminder of their journey, a promise to every guest that in this place all were welcome, respected, and valued. It was a dream worth every challenge, every hardship, and every ounce of dedication, and Robert was ready to uphold it for years to come. Robert transformed his restaurant into a place where everyone is welcomed and respected. If this story inspired you, hit subscribe for more stories of justice and change. Like and share to spread kindness and equality, and let us know in the comments how important is respect to you. Thanks for watching.